The life that lives in the polar regions is highly adapted to life in the cold. So what you're doing is you're surveying how animals have evolved to living life in the cold. We have to do it now, because if we do it in 10 years' time, some of those species won't be around. I'm Melody Clark. I'm a molecular biologist at the British Antarctic Survey. DNA is the blueprint of life. It's present in all the organisms, and it gives us the blueprint of how we develop, how we grow, how we survive, from the cradle to the grave. It's relatively easy to sequence the genomes of any animal we want, really, and that gives us a really good insight into looking at how animals have evolved to live in particular conditions, their evolutionary history, how they've responded to change in the past. And it's just a huge amount of data that we can really understand how an animal really works and functions in its environment and within the ecosystem. The polar regions are disappearing. The cold regions of our planet are disappearing, and once they're gone, they're gone. The life that lives in the polar regions is highly adapted to life in the cold. So the Antarctic has been effectively isolated by a current that goes round the Antarctic, and that's been present along with really cold seas for about 10 to 15 million years. So there are lots of animals in the Antarctic that are really unique to the Antarctic. Their adaptations predicate their responses to future climate change. So are they able to adapt, for example? In the Southern Ocean, there's the ice fish, which look completely clear. They have no hemoglobin, which is the red oxygen-carrying molecule in their body. They've deleted that molecule from their body, and they rely purely on diffused oxygen in the water. And they can do that because the water's so cold, and there's a huge amount of oxygen in cold water. They've taken a long time to get where they are, and it will take them a long time to move somewhere else. And climate change is happening really rapidly. To take an example, the clams we look at live till they're 37. They don't start reproducing till they're 6 or 7. So you can see that with conditions changing really rapidly, they won't have many generations, if many at all, to adapt to climate change. There are a huge number of potential problems. Obviously, there's warming, reduction in sea ice, there's acidification, lack of oxygen, hypoxia, there's sedimentation, a huge number of different changes that are affecting polar life at the moment. But the main one really, the driver, is warming, because that basically raises your metabolism, which means you need more food, which then kind of puts everything slightly out of kilter. Understanding how animals respond to change, you'll be able to predict future ecosystems. The polar ecosystems are very important economically. You've got a huge fishery for fish and krill. You have the indigenous populations that live there, their livelihoods are potentially at risk. You've got invasive species coming in, which can really mess around with the ecosystem. And they're all really important to know for future policy in terms of conservation and looking at the economics of things going forward, without even starting on potentially exploiting biotechnology from these organisms. In the Southern Ocean, which is the seas around the Antarctic, there are approximately 20,000 species of invertebrates, vertebrates, bacteria. We know very little about them. We really haven't catalogued them at all. In terms of biodiversity loss, it's really important to catalogue that now, because once it's gone, it's gone. And there are unique adaptations to the cold. There are enzymes that work really well in the cold. And so we could take what we learn from those cold-adapted enzymes and potentially use them in industrial processes. If we can make them work at lower temperatures, that will actually save us energy and put us on the path to net zero. If you look around the world, there are banks of rare plants, there are banks of ancient crops that are now being exploited again. So, for example, they're looking at ancient wheats to see if they're more resistant to disease and things, and then they're taking the genes out of those ancient wheats and putting them into modern wheat. It's not just cataloguing, it is potentially providing resources for the future to make us a more resilient society when conditions change. And then all the fish have a very specialised antifreeze protein. It's called an antifreeze glycoprotein. And for the most part, it's unique to the Southern Ocean. So all the fish in the Southern Ocean have an antifreeze glycoprotein. But there's one example in the Arctic of the Arctic cod, which has an identical molecule, but it evolved via a completely different route. And it's one of these fantastic examples where nature came up with the same answer to the same problem by a completely different route, completely independently. It's amazing. And there must be a huge number of examples out there when we start to delve into the genomes of these animals.